One of the things that I really work hard to help people understand is the importance of having a preparedness pantry. You want to make sure that in an emergency, you can feed yourself and your family without having to worry about what's in there, that you'll run out, that you don't have things that you like in there. And if you are someone who has begun to think about building a preparedness pantry, I would like to start your journey by helping you understand some of the mistakes that people can make when they're first beginning to create a preparedness pantry. So number one is please don't buy foods that you don't like just because they're on sale. During the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there were a lot of people that went out and bought tons of rice and beans because they knew that that could be nourishing. Rice and beans together makes a complete protein. But here's the problem. If you don't know how to cook raw beans, that's not going to be great. If your family doesn't particularly like rice and beans, that's definitely not going to be great. And there's this myth out there that if you're hungry, you'll just eat anything. And I'm here to tell you, who wants to be that miserable? Why should you're already under stress? If it's an emergency situation, why would you want to eat something you don't like or that you're not used to just because it's an emergency? I suppose if you do get hungry enough, you will eat it. But isn't it much better to just have what you need on hand? I think so. Another thing that happens a lot is people will go out and they stock up on something and they get too much of the same thing. They'll buy 20 pounds of something or dozens of cans of something, and there's no variety in the diet. As humans, we do tend to like the same 10 to 12 foods. However, we also do better if we have variety in our diet. So you want to make sure that there's a variety. Another big challenge, most people, when they stock up, they're thinking, oh, I need to make sure I have enough protein. And so they buy meat for their freezer and canned meat and dried meat. And maybe they have rice or they have quinoa or they have other grains, and they forget about the veggies or the fruit. We need those too. Those are really important. It is possible to buy those canned. If you're doing that, you want to make sure there's not too much salt in there, especially if you're someone who has concerns about salt. If you are looking to buy frozen options, you want to make sure there's nothing else in the bag, just the fruit, just the vegetables. And frozen is a really good option. It's typically picked fresh and flash frozen right there, so it is nutrient dense. That's a really great choice. And a third option is to have dry varieties on hand, either dehydrated or freeze dried. My preference is for freeze dried because it takes less water to rehydrate freeze dried food than it does dehydrated food, but in an emergency situation, either one will work. If you're of the DIY variety, you can certainly dehydrate or can your own foods. That's a good option as well to build your preparedness pantry. A third big mistake that I see when I do pantry consults for people is that there's a bunch of expired food hanging out in the back of the pantry. And that's because you bought something, like you were thinking that you were going to buy something, and that's great that you committed the resources to that, but then you left it in the back of the pantry and you didn't use it, and then it went bad. Please don't do that. Be mindful of the dates of what is in your pantry and make sure that you use it, because it's a waste of food and money for you and resources, actually, people who had to make for that. So we really don't want to do that. Another big pantry mistake is not storing seasoning. We need flavor in our food. We want things to taste good. And as you're building your preparedness pantry and making sure that you have what you need on hand, you want to make sure that you have spices, herbs, condiments, things, or the ingredients to make those things so that you can add flavor and deliciousness to the food that you are having on hand to feed your family in an emergency. Another option is not thinking about your storage issues. We don't want to be storing our food in a damp closet, for example. Not a great choice. We don't want to be storing it somewhere where, especially if it's in clear glass jars, it's exposed to bright light all the time. Our food does best when stored long term if it is in containers that are not going to let in a lot of light, and if it is in a cool, dark space. So just think about where you're storing and make sure that it meets, those requirements, cool and dark. And you also want it to be easily accessible. Don't make it hard to get to. And then the last thing that I like to share with people when it comes to your pantry and avoiding a mistake is overbuying. Don't buy something past your ability to consume it. Don't, I have a client where we are currently coming up with recipe ideas and strategies to use up what she's got in her pantry for her family, because they were in a situation where they decided they needed to have a lot on hand and they bought a ton of food. All of their children had come home for COVID. Now all of the children are gone. It's just her and her husband in her house, and they have massive amounts of preparedness food that's really past their ability to consume it. So making sure that you are being reasonable. And yes, somebody is probably listening to that last statement and going, but it could be just be longer term. Yes, and it depends on what the expiration date is, and it depends on how much they're going to eat things. For that particular client, actually, one of the things that we did is we took some of what they had and we created preparedness pantry starter packs for them to give to each of their children, so that they didn't have quite so much at home. And now we're coming up with ideas for them to be able to rotate that into their pantry and into their everyday pantry, and to make sure that they are able to use the resources that they have set aside for an emergency. So be mindful of what you're doing as you're building your preparedness pantry, and make sure that you're not making these mistakes. I'll have the list repeated down below in the text so that you can write it down and check it out. And I encourage you, if you are watching this and you have not started to build a preparedness pantry, that you make sure that you have food and water and resources available for your family. I do teach a class on that called the Preparedness Pantry Master Class. I will put the link to that down below, and I invite you to join us and learn how to have resources on hand to support yourself and your family. Thanks for watching, folks. Bye.